Welcome to Distribution Talk with Jason Bader, the show where we dive into the stories, struggles, and solutions from business owners and thought leaders in the wholesale distribution market. Hey friends, Jason here. In this episode, I decided to do something that I don't usually do. I am going to go with a monologue here and share some of my thoughts. You all know that I've been on this AI discovery journey for a bit now. And obviously, some of the guests I talk to, we talk a lot about AI and its place in the distribution world and obviously in other places. Today, I just thought I'd share a little bit about some things that I've come to understand and what I've been sharing with audiences actually in a larger format, but thought I would condense it down and share it with you in a podcast format. So here we go. Here's something I hear constantly from distributors and manufacturers alike. Too much time being eaten up by order and quote processing, emails, texts, back and forth. And while your team is buried in that, the real opportunities, the wallet share sitting inside your existing customer base, go untouched. Motivate was built to solve exactly that. Their AI handles the processing side, and their sales insights playbook puts your team on offense, following up on revenue opportunities your ERP data already knows about. The ROI shows up in less than 90 days. Schedule your demo at gomotivate.com and tell them Jason sent you. As an added bonus, Distribution Talk listeners get 50% off installation. Have you ever had that moment where you question whether everything you'd built, your expertise, your experience, your value, was still going to be marketable? I had that moment in 2022, and it all started with a question I almost didn't have the courage to ask. So back in 22, as you all know, ChatGPT launched, and everybody, especially those tech curious folks like myself, we all started playing with it. And I had this business coach at the time, and he and I would talk about different things happening in the tech community and in the advisory world and things like that. And so both of us were very enamored with this newfound phenomenon of ChatGPT. And so we talked about it and we would work on different things and come back and share. And the question that came in to our discussion was, will ChatGPT or other generative AI products, will they replace those of us in an advisory capacity? And that was a really tough question to get my head around. I had to think about this. And so I decided to take that courageous leap and throw some questions into ChatGPT that I used to get from my clients. I mean, it was something that basic questions. And at the time, I was a little more operationally and inventory based. And so I would just really kind of call on some of the questions that I would get from clients. And I'd feed these into ChatGPT and take a look at the answers. So the scary thing was the answers were not perfect, but they were pretty darn good. I mean, they were fairly close to what the same kind of advice I would give. Again, not perfect, but drawing from a lot of different sources in the large language model. But I looked at it and said, is my role going to diminish here pretty quick? And I mean, it's a sobering thought. It's a scary thought for a lot of us in various different roles as we see them today. Is generative AI going to take us over? Well, again, I had a choice. I could either fight this and say, oh, no, it'll never be as good as me. But, look, I had to face the writing on the wall and say, hey, this ain't bad. And it really kind of opens it up for people who are looking for advice. So I think the conclusion I came to at that point was, I am no longer going to be this great purveyor of answers. I mean, that's what people paid me for, is they paid me for my expertise and my answers. And now I had to make a shift or a pivot to, I need to be someone who is the purveyor of questions. I need to be someone who teaches people how to use these newfound tools to ask better questions and then help them guide, the responses that they get. But again, no longer was I the answer guy. And I think this was a huge shift in what I needed to do here. So again, it was kind of fascinating, but rather than fear the technology and get angry and push it away, I chose to become curious. And I think that's honestly why I remain around this today, because I'm not going to fight the progress of these tools, but I do want to really understand them. And to this day, I am incredibly curious about what I can do and what I can build and how I can help clients move forward in their AI journey. So, one of the big things that I think people have a tough time with is the mindset that they bring into starting to use these tools. And unfortunately, what happens is I think they choose kind of the wrong mindset. And what I mean by that is they look at generative AI tools, and we're talking about ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, whole laundry list of these things. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people bring the mentality of a machine mindset. What I mean by a machine mindset is when we design machines, we control the inputs, A plus B equals C, if then statements, and it becomes a very repeatable or predictable response in a machine. And that's what we build them to do. And if you're building a robot, for example, is you want it to do a specific task. And so you build it to do that specific task. And, when it doesn't work properly, then, it's something I did, the coding was wrong or whatever it may be. Well, unfortunately, when people try to bring that mindset to generative AI, they get very frustrated because the answers are not going to be predictable and they're going to change. And they could change from prompt to prompt. I mean, it's crazy. And so, unfortunately, what people think is, oh, this is a passing fad, or it's not quite ready for prime time, this is half-baked technology, and all of these things can conjure up in their mind as they're using these tools, and so they get angry and walk away. And I think the better way to think about how to use these tools and really take a different mindset would be the mindset of a gardener. So when a gardener's looking at a garden, they are looking for an output, but they do understand that there are variables to that output, and they're not expecting repeatable results each and every time. Now, they can manage the context. They can, see, oh, hey, if I add more water or different fertilizer to this, the plant grows in a different way. Or, if it gets different sunlight or all of these different things. So we look at different variables in a way that allows us to create, yet not try to control the outcome. And so I think that's really the mentality that I would like you all to adopt as you're moving into using these Gen AI products that, yes, you can modify context. And then all of a sudden it becomes kind of a collaborative experience there with the product, just like it would be if you're tending a garden. The more you add light, what happens? Or if you change the soil, what happens? And you're constantly tinkering with this to be, aesthetically pleasing, if you will, in a garden. Very similar to how I interact with these Gen AI products. I tinker, I mess around. There's an outcome there. Oh, I'd like you to push this outcome. And I'll talk a little bit more about that relationship that I've developed with these products. But again, those are the two mentalities I think you just kind of need to get your head around, that it is not a machine mentality that will allow you to thrive with these products. It's more of that gardener mentality and that willing to see different outcomes. And again, I find that it really fuels my curiosity as I tinker and mess around with it. So, in order to kind of get us a little bit further down the line, I want to talk a little bit about what AI really is. And it's pretty darn simple. It's just pattern recognition technology, and it's used to solve problems. I mean, if you want to get down to the core basis of it, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not a technologist. I think you all know me well enough that that is not who I am. I am somebody who likes to observe technology, and I like to use technology, but it's really around solving problems inside of these businesses, and these are often human problems. But I'm fascinated by how technology is applied to that. But I am not a technologist. I don't build code. I don't do anything like that. I just help people understand what that technology can do. But also, I help people root out challenges inside of their business. With AI, some of the things that kind of helped me understand what it is and get a little more comfortable with it is, let's think about these things that you're already comfortable with. So, for example, I mean, one of the more simple forms of artificial intelligence is a thermostat. Yeah. Temperature changes. It tells a piece of equipment to raise or lower temperatures or turn on cooling or whatnot. But a thermostat is a very basic AI that we all know and trust, and we've seen it on the wall. We get that. And then, we've got something a little more sophisticated, something like Google Maps. Now, is there artificial intelligence going on there? Oh, you bet it is. It looks for traffic patterns, says, oh, you're going at this rate of speed, you're going to get there at this time, or here's a different route based on construction, whatever it may be. So, again, there's some dynamic interaction going on real time. Again, these are technologies that we trust. Yes. Have we all gotten navigated occasionally and got sent to the wrong place or wound up in a dead end? Oh, yeah. Happens all the time to me. But again, I think most of us are fairly comfortable with that type of artificial intelligence. Where it gets a little scary and a little bit weird is when we get into these Gen AI products, like ChatGPT. This is where people get nervous. Is like, oh, the machine's going to take us over. So again, it's an evolution here. I think ultimately most of us will become fairly comfortable with these products, but we have to use these products in order to become more comfortable, just as we did with that map product. So again, it's an evolution. So don't feel bad if you're still a little bit on the fence or you're a little bit nervous about where these products are taking us today and ultimately what they could be used for. So again, a little bit more background here. So we've had a shift in the evolution of these products in this Gen AI phenomenon, originally starting with language processing, natural language processing. And where this really comes in is think about I'll dare say it, the A product, the Alexa product, or the Google Home. And what was happening there is we would be telling it commands. We would tell it things to do. And what was really happening in the background is these devices were learning how we talked naturally and we as humans so it could perform tasks. So it was really gathering data. That's really what was going on during this phase here of the AI revolution. And so it ultimately then took that information that it learned, that natural language that came from humans, and then moved into what's called LLMs or large language models. And so those large language models took that information that had been gathering and it started generating text, for example, and it started to reason just slightly and sort of just solve complex, language tasks and give you outputs. Very similar to when I entered in those questions that I would receive from clients previously. That now it's taking that information and sending out results based on what it has learned in the past. And so, again, these are very kind of basic explanations of what's going on behind the scenes there. Then, as we've moved on a little bit further, now it kind of goes into multimodal modules or models. I know it's a big mouthful. This is really where these products started to generate images or audio files and friends who created songs based on just a few prompts and it was just kind of fun stuff, but now we're going into video, some really neat video products and I know again that can be a little bit scary as when we are looking at social media, is that real, is that fake? Yeah, but all of that is just again an evolution of these products and the capabilities associated with those products here. The boundaries of our creativity, I think that's what's getting really interesting. And I think that's dissolving. It's where you had to reach out to a coder or somebody who became really expert in, whether it was image generation or audio or video for that matter. Now, many of us can create some pretty darn good content without the need of a third party. Now, I know that feels a little bad because, I absolutely respect people who have mastered their craft and they've done very, very well with it. But sometimes you just want it quick and it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be quick and needs to get in there. And so that's where I have enjoyed using these multimodal type of products and type of prompting and outputs. Now, we go a little bit further. And this is kind of where we're starting to go futuristic, although it is today, but I think it's going to take us into the future. And that is the agentic AI. And I've spoken about that in other podcasts. And I'm kind of fascinated with the agentic AI movement. And this is where we move from, getting outputs, that we are going to do something with and creating really great prompts that create images or they create audio or they create whatever it may be. But ultimately, we have to do something with that output. Now, when we move over to agentic AI, no longer do we have to do the heavy lifting once the content is created. With agents now that the AI has shifted from just giving us something to actually taking that information and doing something. And that's really a huge shift. And I think this is where the workforce side gets a little bit nervous. Is like, oh, are agents going to take over my job? You know, I can't tell you that. I don't know one way or the other. But what I can tell you is that those who are curious are going to find ways to harness these agents to do things that will make their lives easier. And in companies, we can use agents to do tasks that humans are not interested in doing or reluctant to do, or it just takes too much time. It's mundane tasks where we move away from the intellectual curiosity. That's what an agent's really good at. It doesn't really get bored. It doesn't, push back or doesn't say, you know what, I'd rather not talk to that customer. No emotion. And so that's where those agents can really help us take on tasks that maybe our human side does not want to work with. So, those are some of the key milestones, if you will, or kind of backgrounds. And no, again, I know I'm oversimplifying and I'm going to get roasted by my technology friends here. They're going to say, oh, you've oversimplified. But, that's kind of what I do. I oversimplify because I just really want people to kind of get the concept. It doesn't have to be perfect.
This episode of Distribution Talk is sponsored by NSQL Distribution Software. NSQL is a fully functional distribution-based software package, and these folks do it very well at a price point many smaller distributors can afford. Another thing I like about this company is they do it all in-house. They take on these applications and build them into the platform using state-of-the-art Microsoft technology. No third-party bolt-ons for them. This is important because when you need technical assistance, they are the single point of contact. If you're ready to step up to a fully loaded, scalable distribution package at an affordable price, look no further than NSQL Distribution Software at www.nsql.com. That's INXSQL.com.
So let me shift here into some of the practical applications that are getting pretty exciting. So I have been attending AI conferences now for about 3 years, and I'm really fascinated by what's coming out of these software developers that are focused on distribution needs, and they're looking at problems and challenges that these AI products and really the advancement in AI technology and generative AI technology can do for organizations. And so let me just talk about 3 of them that I really like right now and that are kind of exciting for me. The first one is looking at quote and order automation. So, this is actually kind of an interesting technology. It first had to come out about a little over 2 years ago is when I started to really start to see some of these products come out. And they've only gotten better. I mean, they've really got advanced and they're starting to look a lot like each other. So it's sometimes hard to differentiate. But the order quote automation, if you start thinking about it, the clients that I work with in the distribution space, somewhere around, could be upwards of 70, maybe even 80% of the inbound order or quote requests, come through email. And a lot of them come through SMS or text as well. I mean, so you've got this tremendous amount of inbound traffic here. And what happens is that customer service representative or sometimes an inside sales person, what they'll do is they have to take that inbound email or quote or text, whatever it is, and they have to rekey that into their ERP or their distribution software package in order for something to happen. And that's a lot of time. And so all of a sudden now you have this very talented individual, this problem solver that you've been training for a lot of years and who's very good at helping customers and they're being relegated into this data entry function. And I think that's a tremendous waste of human talent. And so, what I would say is we need to move a lot of that busy work or that task based work over to the machine. And what's really cool is right now the machines can take that email, whether it's an attachment, it could be a PDF, it could be an image, which is actually really fascinating, or it could be a spreadsheet or whatever it is, whatever the customer is sharing over with us. The AI can take a look at that, decipher what that person is talking about. And it could be just, jargon or gobbledygook. It doesn't matter. And as long as there's some things to grab onto, it can match up with our ERP database and ultimately create an order or a quote. And so again, it can extract from text, it can extract from the body of an email. So what's happening here is it's really performing that task-based activity that a CSR would have to do and take up an inordinate amount of time to do. These products can actually reduce that time dramatically. And I'm thinking, 60, 70% of the time is now saved. It's really fascinating watching these. And the beautiful thing is, once the AI learns what a customer calls something, because, in many of our companies, we have a lot of jargon or a lot of generic terms for a product. It's not necessarily what we have inside of our ERP or our database. And so what the AI is doing is it's developing mapping. And so every time that customer comes back and requests something, the AI then knows now what this is in the future. And it never forgets. And I think that's just one of the beautiful things. And I love watching this happen. And I love watching distributors who are embracing this technology. And they're saying, oh my gosh, it's all of a sudden freeing up my CSR or I'm freeing up my inside salesperson to do more human tasks. Okay. So what do we do with that time? And this is kind of getting into the next really interesting area that I think these products are going. And this is in sales insights. And what I mean by this is AI now is learning a lot about your company, a lot about your transactions, because it does have access to your ERP and it's really understanding customer buying habits much greater than we as humans can actually comprehend. And so what happens is in these sales insights, and I'm giving it a generic term, but these sales insights products, what they do is they start scouring the database and they say, hey, wait a minute, this customer looks an awful lot like another customer, but that other customer seems to be buying in many more categories than this customer does. There's some sort of instruction is given to the CSR or inside salesperson. Hey, why don't you reach out to this customer and say, did you know that we sell this, this, and this? And what we're doing is we're prompting our inside salespeople or the human to now make revenue generating phone calls or more human interaction with customers. And I think that's just really driving this inside salesperson back to the human element of what we hired and trained them for, rather than having to spend so much time on that data entry type of task. Other things that these sales insights products can do is they start seeing when a customer's buying pattern has changed. For example, they might have been buying 100 of these widgets every month, and now they're only buying 10, or they've stopped buying. And usually what would happen is it would take most companies 3 months, 6 months to all of a sudden realize that this customer isn't buying these products anymore. And so it would take a lot longer period of time, whereas the AI can analyze and deliver that information very, very quickly so that our inside salespeople can react and they can reach out and say, hey, has something changed in your business? Or, are we getting beat by somebody else? Or whatever it may be. But I think that's the fascinating thing about these sales insights products. Now, again, they are way more sophisticated. There's way more that they can do. But those are kind of the cool things I can see inside of those types of products. Now, I'm going to give you one more area that I think is kind of fascinating. And this really goes to a lot of what my practice has been for the last several years. So I was doing a lot of executive coaching. And, years ago, I had a client who he wasn't really a client that I saw on a regular basis. I would run into him at conferences. He came to a couple seminars, but we developed a friendship. It was really, and unfortunately, I developed friendships with my clients, but that's just the way it is. It's my nature. And so I get this phone call, And this guy, and let's just call him Bob to make it easier. So Bob reaches out and he says, "Hey, man, you got a couple of minutes? I want to run something by you." I said, "Sure, man. No problem, Bob. What do you got?" And he said, "I fired all my outside salespeople yesterday." And, I took a pause. I was like, man, I now many of us has fantasized about that, but not many have executed. I'll put it that way. And I said, "Well, Bob, tell me about what happened here." So he did, and he shared with me his thoughts and all of this, and he had gotten kind of angry with them about not doing this, not doing that, and he was kind of a rash guy anyway. And so at the end of his our dialogue, he said, "I think I was a little too hasty with my decision." And it took all of my willpower to say, "You think?" But I said, "Well, yeah, you might have been, but okay, well, maybe, hopefully you've learned something." And he said, "I think I need to run this by somebody before I make decisions like that." And I said, "Yeah, I mean, that's probably a great idea." And he said, "How much would it cost me on a monthly basis to be able to run these things by you?" And I stepped back for a minute. I went, "Well, I don't know, Bob, but I'm sure going to find out." And so ultimately, this is what drove my executive coaching practice. It was just kind of out of that need. And what I came to realize, and this is something that, I've coached many different leaders, is that it gets very lonely at the top. And especially in a privately held company, sometimes you don't have this person you can share questions with or get advice, really unbiased advice. I mean, if you can ask somebody, you could ask, people in your organization, your general manager or whatever, but there's bias there. I mean, they've all got skin in the game. So if you start making crazy questions, they're all putting together resumes. I mean, so what a service like this does is it really kind of goes unbiased and it gives somebody the ability just to, "Hey, I got a funny question I want to run by you." Well, that's great. And I'm not saying that you should just fire all of your advisors and whatnot, but I think there's an interesting application here for AI. So a friend of mine, a gentleman that I've kind of become friends with, and he is a far greater AI technologist than I am. He shared something with me that he'd been working on, and it was building a group of advisors. And this isn't new. It got close to me. I'll put it that way. And so what he shared with me, I think is something that I would love to see privately held distributors or really anybody in any role build for themselves. And this is something that you could do inside of your AI. So this is going to get a little weird. So I'm just going to throw it out there. What he did was he built this advisory panel, virtual advisory panel of 8 different personas, and he gave them each, a segment. So, now 8 might be too many, but if you think about it, could you build something on a much smaller scale? And so, I look at it and, and I played around with this myself personally, and I was able to come up with about 7 personas that I would run things by it. And maybe one of them would be the skeptic, one would be the strategist, one would be the visionary, one would be the HR counsel, one would be the heavy technologist, et cetera. So you come up with these personas. And when you wanted to run a question by them, kind of like my clients would do to me, and we would debate and talk, and I would just pull from my experience, is you would pose a question that's a nagging question to this group that you've built, this virtual group of advisors that you've built, and let them kind of debate it out a little bit and look at different angles. See, I think sometimes when we do things like this, all of a sudden there'll be insights that are created from these different perspectives. And I was shocked at how easy it was to build this little advisory panel just, by using specific prompts and allowing the AI to ask me questions about what I wanted in each one of them. But I'm just sharing this because I think it's something that you all should go try. It's, again, very fascinating. And again, probably cutting my own throat with my advisory services. But my goal is to really get you all curious. And this one was a curiosity for me. I'm still working on mine, I'll be honest with you, but I am fascinated by the potential of creating a virtual advisory board. Another thing that kind of came out of this is I've realized I do sit on a couple of, advisory boards. And unfortunately, it is really hard to get 7 or 8 of us to get our schedules to match. And so sometimes it's hard to gather the group. Whereas if I built my virtual advisory panel, boy, I can tap into that anytime I darn well please, anytime a situation comes up. Now, I think again, these are three applications and there are so many more. Please understand that there are so many different ways that we can go, but I just want to touch on a couple three that I'm kind of excited about right now. When we look at utilizing this technology and our relationship to this technology, and that's really what I was kind of creating with this panel is I'm creating a different relationship. And I think that's maybe sometimes a hard word for people to get their head around when we're interacting with what's ultimately a tech product. But I am developing this relationship. But I think we need to understand kind of what the machine is good at and what we are good at as humans. And I think we're still pretty darn good at some stuff. So I don't want to paint too bleak a picture here. On the AI side, there are things that a machine does exceptionally well and frankly better than we do. It can assimilate a lot of training data, a lot of information, and it recognizes patterns way faster than we can. So the speed to insight is a lot faster. Very good at language mastery. I mean, the ability to translate and to see different, opportunities is pretty exceptional inside of the machine side of this. And it actually is pretty darn good at idea expansion, throwing out different angles and whatnot and pulling from different resources. So, I think that's really the machine side. Now, let's jump over to the other side of the fence where the humans live. What we are still very, very good at, we still own intuition. We own judgment. We own values. And we can make meaning out of outputs and we can see the world just a little bit differently. And so I think we're still, we still have a very valuable role here in the world. I think that, the other big aha moment for me was that accountability is still very, very human. We cannot delegate accountability to the model. It doesn't work that way. And the model is never responsible for consequences. We as the humans still own the consequences. So again, we've got two sides here and we have some very, very basic differences between how, the two of us function. Now, I think where the interesting part is when we overlap and we start melding these two sides and these two skill sets here. This is where I think the interesting work begins. And this is where the creativity comes. And in fact, kind of one of the big overlaps for me is where creativity occurs. And I can get very creative with my AI. I can ask questions and it prompts me back with questions and we can collaborate. And I think, again, this is getting weird, but I found that it's really a fascinating idea collaborator. We can make sense, where different outputs live and where they work. I can frame problems between, using the AI and myself, going back and forth. And so, we can come up with different possibilities and scenarios, frankly, that I would never have thought of. And I think those are fascinating things for me when something is shared by that AI that hadn't occurred to me, but makes an awful lot of sense in the problem I'm trying to solve. So I think, again, those are wonderful byproducts of machine and human working in concert. Now, I do want to share, kind of one really interesting aha moment that's come out of this is the roles, where that collaboration role kind of comes together. See, what I've come to realize over the last 2 to 3 years now, actually a little more than that, but I've come to realize that AI is the greatest thought partner that I've ever had. It has access to so much data and I can have incredibly rich interactions with it. So it is a phenomenal thought partner and I use it as such. But here's where I have to remain careful. I am the thought leader and I have to maintain that role because let's face it, AI hallucinates. It makes stuff up when it does. It doesn't like to not have an answer. Let's just put it that way. So we've all had those friends who just make stuff up and they can be so convincing when they make stuff up. That's what AI can do sometimes. And so as the thought leader, I have to look at the practicality of that answer, that response, and then challenge it. Questions like, yeah, you sure about that? I don't know. And I've done this numerous occasions. Sometimes I've seen where my AI has gone into the role of cheerleader And this is a complaint I hear from a lot of my friends who go deep on this stuff is that, it's just a yes man sometimes. And so, I have to tell it, hey, I need you to be a skeptic today. I need you to challenge your own assumptions. So again, I remain the thought leader, but it is the greatest thought partner I've ever run across. So, how would you build this into your life? And a lot of people ask me, how do I get started? So, I'm a lifelong learner. That is just something I'm curious by nature. That's just who I am. This is why I have this podcast. I like origin stories. I interview people. I'm curious about them, but I'm also curious about this technology and I remain curious. Now, what I've found is I have gone out and searched for learning platforms. And trust me, there is no shortage of platforms or people that want to show you how to use AI. No shortage whatsoever. I just happen to go out and research and find the one that I like best. So I happen to subscribe to something called Skill Leap. The company I think is called Futurepedia. And trust me, I went through a lot of them to try to find the one. And I had a lot of them recommended to me. And I tested them out. I like Skill Leap just because I happen to like the voice of the individual on these videos and I like their practical approach. But look, it's not everybody's cup of tea. What I would suggest though is go out and find a learning platform that works best for you and that you like it and you kind of follow that individual and say, this works for me. So what I've done is I commit myself to a minimum of 2 videos a day. And trust me, they've got tons of content. I mean, on all different platforms. And so these are, 15-minute videos at the longest. So I can handle that. But what I do is I just challenge myself to do that kind of discipline. So it's kind of like learning a foreign language. If you pick it up and then you walk away for a week, you're just not going to be very good at it anymore. And so my point is that you need to do this every single day. I go into the learning platform on a daily basis, but I also utilize these tools on a daily basis. I mean, I am literally using either ChatGPT, Claude, or I'm trying to get into some of the other models. I use them multiple times a day, just for all kinds of things. Because again, I'm curious by nature, but I also want to continue my fluency going forward. So, one little cool trick that you can do is use AI to help you learn AI. And so I'm just going to throw this out here as a prompt. Throw it into your favorite AI package, whichever one floats your boat. I'm cool with. And here's the prompt I would use: you are a learning coach. And what you're doing is telling it its role. I'm a big believer in telling it you are you are a learning coach. Build me a 21-day study guide to develop my working knowledge of generative AI as it applies to B2B distribution or whatever business you're in. I learn best in 15-minute daily sessions. Include 1 practical exercise per week I can apply AI at work. Feel free to ask me questions one at a time to better refine your suggestions. I found that, creating that prompt, actually in about 30 seconds, you're going to get a really interesting type of interactive study guide. In other words, it's going to work with whatever answers you give it. It's going to ask you questions, and whatever answers you give it is going to ultimately build you a very strong guide to kind of get you in the game. So if you're sitting on the fence and like, oh, how do I do this? Do I go to a class or something like this? Let AI do the heavy lifting for you. Again, it's your thought partner and use it as such. I rambled on here for quite a bit because I really do enjoy this, but I think the bigger point here is that I enjoy watching others get excited about this technology, and I love seeing the light bulb go on. So I'm going to leave you at this point and just say, hey, go out and learn what you can about it. Just go at your own pace, stay curious about this. But if I can leave you with one kind of fundamental thought is AI is that amazing thought partner, but you cannot abdicate your role as the thought leader. Stay in that role and the results will be amazing. If I can help you anyway, please do not hesitate to ask.
Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, consider sharing with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to follow the show on your favorite podcast application. Links to sponsors, products, and services mentioned during this episode can be found in the show description area or at www.distributiontalk.com. Distribution Talk is edited and mixed by the brilliant team at the Creative Imposter Studios. This episode was brought to you by my company, the Distribution Team. We are a consulting services firm dedicated to helping wholesale distribution clients remove barriers to profitability, generate wealth, and achieve personal goals. To learn more about how we can help your company succeed, check us out at www.thedistributionteam.com.
This episode is brought to you by Connected Peers, an online peer collaboration platform for distribution professionals. Let's face it, most managers don't have the opportunity to speak with their industry peers about common challenges in their departments. Sure, they might see each other at an annual conference, but that hardly provides any real relationship building or continuity. What if there was a forum to solve challenges with those in your same role? Well, now there is. The concept is simple. Purchasing managers meeting with purchasing managers, training managers meeting with training managers, marketing managers meeting with marketing managers. You get the idea. There are 10 unique role-based communities to choose from. These are monthly, facilitated meetings all via Zoom. Ask questions and receive feedback from people who understand the challenges of your position. Isn't it time that you quit going it alone? To learn more and find your peers, visit us at www.connectedpeers.com.